the basic set. Stop. Oh, this cat is going to be the death of my YouTube career. Alright, the one big anime that I am adding to the list of stuff that I watched last year was Demon Slayer, which is fantastic. It has some of the best animation in any series that I have seen in recent memory. The storytelling is wonderful. It's nice to see a show that has a main character that is just so wholesome and good as this main character is, to the point where when he kills these monster enemies that everybody is like, these are monsters, they're just terrible, and he sits and waits with them as they kind of disintegrate and die and hear their story, out of respect for, you know, a life is ending regardless of if it was a monstrous one, is really, really cool. The cast of characters is absolutely delightful. The action sequences are incredible. There's really not a lot to say other than that it is just incredibly good. It really is. And the emotional stakes of the ongoing story, considering that the main character's sister is also turned into one of these vampire demon monsters, and she travels with them and dealing with the fact that he is a demon slayer and has this sister who's a demon, and half the cast is trying to kill her as well because she's a demon and they don't understand what's going on. It just is incredibly well done. All the characterizations are good. The plot is interesting, and they released a movie last year that is the interim piece between season 1 and season 2, which was also excellent. I only had one complaint with it. It went on about 10 minutes too long. The last sequence was weird. It felt kind of tacked on and didn't feel like it fit with everything else that was going on in the episode, but also still very, very good. Just that whole series is a huge recommendation, even if you don't like anime. There is only one episode where the animation was completely half-assed, which sucked because the episode's writing is really good, but the animation just took me completely out of it. Other than that, great show. Next, let's go over The Boys. Let's talk about the Amazon comic book shows. The Boys Season 2 was excellent. It still had some of the same problems of the first season, where the pacing was a little all over the place, in the sense of like they came up with the episode list first and then wrote the plot around it. So there felt like there was just a little bit of filler, but all of the events of this last season were incredibly well handled. Starlight's slow descent from the Seven, Homelander's continuing to just lose his mind, Billy Butcher dealing with the revelations of the previous season, Huey slowly coming into his own, and the big changes though from the comic books, how they changed the Lamplighter storyline was excellent, considering he's just an afterthought in the comic books, although that leads into another story in the comic books, but how they handled that was still pretty great. It just leaves open another aspect of the comic books that they haven't gotten into, so we'll see if they do that at some point. And how they changed and modernized the character Stormfront in particular was incredibly well handled, and tying her into the greater storyline was also really well done. That second season, the first season was, this was really good, and the second season was, this was incredible. This is like Mandalorian Season 2, elevated it just enough that this is actually one of the better dramas on TV. The only major issue is a lot of people will be turned off by the over-the-top sense of humor and some of the violence of it, but the actual moment-to-moment storytelling is so good. I am really enjoying how they're handling this show. I recently got through all the comic books and went back and watched them, so I'm wondering how they're going to handle things moving forward, especially with introducing Soldier Boy, and they're going to do the Herogasm storyline, which, no spoilers on that. It's going to be really messed up if they get depending on how they handle that. So, anyway, Boys Season 2 was great. Highly recommend that show. But that brings me to the other superhero show, which in many cases is like the flip side of the coin from The Boys, and that's Invincible. Invincible, if you haven't watched it, is the story of a teenager who is the son of one of the biggest superheroes in the world. as he is coming into his powers and trying to find his way as a superhero as the world is reeling from a very shocking event that happens in the first episode of the show. It is crazy where that show goes. In a lot of ways, like I said, it's the flip side of the coin from The Boys, in that The Boys is a very, very cynical take on superheroes and how, if superheroes existed in the real world, how they might be cynically used for profit and how they would have to be sociopaths and stuff like that, whereas this one takes more of the bent of, no, superheroes can still be noble and want to do the right thing, but the consequences of superheroes' actions have real-world consequences. The show is shockingly violent at times. The characters have to deal with the actual consequences of, like, destroying parts of the city and dealing with the consequences of people who are fighting each other who could liquefy a person in an instant. Like I said, though, unlike The Boys, it's not as cynical. It's more of looking for the nobility in trying to be the hero and trying to balance being a hero and being a student while having real-world consequences for your actions. Unlike a Spider-Man or something like that, there are real-world consequences every time they step out to be heroes. It is mostly well-made. There are a couple of episodes where the animation takes a dive in a way that I personally found really distracting. The mystery of the initial event is well handled. All the side characters are great. It's just a very, very good show, and highly recommend it to any superhero fans or animation fans as well. Okay, so I think I've got two more quick addendums before we go back to what I filmed previously. We've got Love, Death, and Robots I watched, which I am a big fan of that series, and I hope we get more. Love, Death, and Robots is essentially a series of short films put out by Netflix that all have some kind of a adult bent, and they're all vaguely sci-fi, some more than others. The first season was 18 episodes, and unfortunately the sequel season was only 8 episodes, but still very good. Both seasons have their highs and their lows. I feel like the second season never hit the highs that the first season had, with the more contemplative stuff like Zima Blue, or the hard action of Sunny's Edge, or even the quirky humor of When the Yogurt Took Over. But the second season does have some really strong episodes in it, like Pop Squad and stuff like that, that still really handle the concept of sci-fi in different situations and different concepts well. I do highly recommend that series. It's a really easy watch through. Like I said, it's a series of shorts, so nothing is more than 15 minutes long, and just a lot of fun. Really good animation. It's nice seeing a whole bunch of different styles. Yeah, just Love, Death, and Robots is great. And then the last one on my addendum is Sex Education. Sex Education is a delightful show. It is a weird kind of out-of-time story, and the character interactions are great, and seeing these people trying to find themselves also while dealing with the physical aspects of becoming adults and how to deal with their own emotions and physical wants and desires is great. The storyline, where it picked up off of season 2, is overall pretty good. I have a couple of problems with the new season. I feel like the non-binary character is not as well handled as they could have been. They're just kind of there. The conflict that they have is kind of weird. My biggest problem is with a lot of these shows, especially considering it takes place in Britain, they always bring in the conflict of uniforms in high school. And in Britain, you have uniforms in high school, so this is literally a non-issue there. And I've always never found the whole, well, we need to protect students' individuality thing an issue. Partially because I was really never the type of person to care about what I was wearing on a day-to-day basis when I was in high school. Like, I did the bare minimum. So for me, whenever I see that conflict of people losing their minds because of school uniforms, it seems silly. Especially when one of the main conflicts is that a character just doesn't want to wear a uniform that's 3 sizes too big. And, I mean, I guess they're comfortable, but it just felt weird. It just felt like a weird conflict. Like, I understand those are the things that people deal with in high school, but there were higher stakes things happening in the season that felt like a much bigger problem. Also the way that they deal with a lot of the main characters' main storylines and how their relationships are going in and out. People dealing with trying to figure out how to be good partners, figuring out what they really want, and dealing with betrayal and personal problems and such. It just was very, very well handled. Mainly Otis's story and his going back and forth with Maeve was really well handled in a way that that type of storyline would normally bother me, where it's just a comedy of errors. But I think they did a really good job of bringing them in and out of each other's lives. Eric's relationship with Adam was simultaneously great and heartbreaking, and watching Eric try to find himself and his own identity of being gay in the world, even though he's been so confidently out for such a long time, that it's still nice to see the way that they handle the fact that even he's still struggling with his identity, which is a lot of what this season was about, was people figuring out who they were and who they were with each other. It's a show that's well handled. The only other major thing that does kind of take me out of it sometimes is I'm having to remind myself that these are high schoolers, and they're showing the sexual interactions of high schoolers. I know they're not in real life. I know they're adults, but they're supposed to be high schoolers, and portraying that does feel weird. I understand why they do it and why it's necessary, because they want to destigmatize these things for audiences. They want to destigmatize those things for younger audiences who are going through these, so you can have these conversations. But it does sometimes come off as a bit much. And it's also nice to see the way they handle the older members of the cast and their relationship as well, like Otis's mom and Ula's dad learning to co-parent, and then Otis and Ula as exes learning to cohabitate when their parents get together, and having another young person entering the world. Very well handled as well, seeing characters who, even as adults, don't have it all together, is also a nice thing to see, as they're juxtaposing the kids and the adults both trying to figure out their stuff. Still love the show. Still a big recommendation. Sex Education is great. Okay, now we're getting into some of my favorites for the year. I think I've got 3 left. Yep, 3 left. We'll start with Midnight Mass. I loved Midnight Mass. That is a heavy show. The problem with it is that it bills itself as more of a straight horror story, and it's not. It's more of a contemplation of various aspects. Like, it is very, very monologue heavy. It is ultimately a different take on a particular type of horror story, but it is so deep and so heavy and so well acted. The only real complaint with it is that the cinematography is a little flat through a lot of it, but the character work is great, the writing is great. The only thing is that it is a very, very heavy show. And I like that they keep the supernatural elements just enough of a mystery that when you do find out what's going on, it doesn't feel like it's totally out of place. The basic setup of Midnight Mass being that it's a small island town in the northeast, and a new preacher has come to town to take over the small parish there, and all of a sudden, like, weird miracles start happening, and different characters who all have different opinions on faith and the afterlife, kind of coming to terms with those different things. It is very interesting, a very cool watch, but it is not for the faint of heart. It does go to some very, very dark places. There is also a fair warning for anyone who has dealt with any kind of religious trauma. It is heavy on that in this show, but I cannot recommend it enough. You just take it in for what it is. It is slow, it is methodical, but it is incredibly well done. The one I was pleasantly surprised by how good it ended up being was Only Murders in the Building. I assumed it was going to be good and it was going to be fun. I love Steve Martin, I love Martin Short, and anytime those two work together, it's magic, so I wasn't expecting it to be bad. The basic setup is, it's all people who live in the same building. One being an actor who used to be a detective on a show in the 80s or 70s or 80s, played by Steve Martin, a director slash Broadway producer who has fallen on hard times, played by Martin Short, and another young woman who is also living in the building, renovating her aunt's apartment, and all of them get involved in a murder, but they get involved in this murder in the building because they are all giant fans of true crime, which is part of what sets this one really apart from everything else. Outside of the fact that they are creating a podcast on the murder investigation as they're doing it, to the point where later in the series, like, they've got fans and stuff. If you haven't seen American Vandal on Netflix, it feels a lot like that, but just better done, which American Vandal is great. Seriously, check it out. The setup is silly, but the way it breaks down true crime and true crime docs is incredibly funny. Whereas this one is a little bit more subversive with how it plays with the ideas of true crime. The biggest thing with the show is they're constantly coming at the crime from the focus of if the crime was a narrative, which actually causes them to miss things as it goes along. Great cast, wonderful group of characters. The mystery turns out to be really compelling. All the twists and turns are great. Selena Gomez actually is, I've always enjoyed her as an actress, especially in her later stuff, but she really holds her own with everybody else in this story, especially when she's paired with, two of the all-time greats. Could not recommend this one more. And the setup for season 2 was also great. It is a small spoiler, skip ahead a few seconds, but the only thing I will say that was kind of frustrating with it is that the teaser at the beginning of the season never comes up until the very end. It's just supposed to give you some little things throughout the series to throw you off, but ultimately turns into the actual reveal is just a teaser for season 2. That being said, that was like my only complaint. Everything else about it is great. Cast is great. Direction is great. Story's great. It's one of my favorite of the year. Only next to the final thing I'm going to be talking about, which is Netflix's Arcane, which is my favorite show of the year, hands down, which is crazy. Because when I first heard that they were doing it, it was like, well, that could be fun. I'd like to know more about that particular universe, but the fact that they pulled it off as well as they did is mind-boggling. So, Arcane is an animated show set in the League of Legends universe, and it is the best show of the year. I stand by that wholeheartedly. The animation in and of itself is worth watching it alone. It is the most beautiful show I have ever seen. The cinematography is great and well thought out. There is really not a wasted frame anywhere in this show. It has some of the best fight sequences in anything I have ever seen. And I'm talking anything. It is great. And not only that, but it tells a deep, meaningful story. Every character has a full arc. Unless they don't, but that when they don't, it's for a good reason. It tells its story amazingly well. It's got every story intertwines perfectly. You never feel bored. I was sitting at the end of literally every episode going, I have to know what's going to happen next. Especially with some of the massive twists that happen pretty early on in the series. This show also has the most well-earned rug pull that I have ever seen. Basically where everything seems like it's going in a certain direction and then it just doesn't. And it's so well-earned and shocking in a genuinely well-written way. I really cannot sing the praises of this show enough. And the only thing is, like, I'm so worried that because of what it is, people aren't going to watch it, and they really, really need to. It is so well done. It's an animated Game of Thrones done even better. It's so good. It is so well made and well crafted. It's going to be a crime if it does not get the viewership it deserves. So seriously, everyone out there who may be watching this video, please watch Arcane on Netflix. It is so good. It is my show of the year, and I know it's going to get overlooked because it's an animated fantasy show, but I cannot emphasize enough how incredible it is. Please go out of your way to watch that. That's where I'm going to end this particular segment. So that is all the major TV that I've watched this year that I can remember. There are a few other ones in there. Like I said, I watched The Masked Singer. Enjoy that for what it is. Watch some of Love on the Spectrum, which is weird. There's parts of it that are fun because they pick the best people to watch, and it is interesting seeing dating from a completely different point of view, but it does also sometimes feel very exploitative. other than that, I can't really think of anything else major that I watched. Oh, my cat's going to be the death of me. But that being said, I'm running out of time on this take, so I'm just going to say, thanks for watching. I'm James, and I've been arguing semantics.
End cassette 2. Proceed to cassette 3. Video games.